Hello and welcome to the Michael Mama Show. We're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Ancient secrets revealed. Okay, today we're going to talk about longevity. You know, there are, of course, a lot of things you can do, and there's so much on the internet and stuff about what to eat, what not to eat, exercise, diet, all that. But you know, if you look at the ancient literature, and not just in the Veda, but also in the Bible and things, there are these guys that lived hundreds of years. And it's not because they were taking vitamins and minerals, you know. So what's the other factor that's involved in that? And what the other factor is, and the most crucial factor in longevity that we really aren't even cognizant of in the world at large, is the fishbowl. You know, we talked about the world as a fishbowl, and if the fishbowl is dirty, the water is dirty, everything goes bad. And certainly longevity is included in that. Our mental states, our emotional states, the weather, everything. And the degree of correlation between things goes far beyond our common willingness to entertain that even as a possibility. Somebody once asked me once, because, you know, how did that go? So much, you know, there's free will and there's predetermination. And so much of our lives is just, it's karma. And what is karma? Cause and effect. It's predetermination. So somebody asked me once, do you mean to tell me, they said, that if there's an airplane crash and 100 and some people die, that they were all meant to die at that particular moment? And karmically speaking, the answer to that question is yes. There's an infinite correlation in who was on that plane and why and when and where, and it all fits together perfectly. And everything is correlated, even the weather. I remember once I was around my teacher. This was a long time ago. I was 20 something years old, I guess. Yeah, early 20s. And he was asking, you know, what would different attributes to an enlightened age be like? Just threw the question out there, see what we'd say. And I said, well, there would be no hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that. And he said, and he just added, he said, where there are people living. That's a very interesting thing to say. There'll still be storms and weathers and earthquakes and all of that. But the infinite correlation, if people were really involved, if the group consciousness was really healthy, those things wouldn't happen where people are living. Now, we can hear that as a concept and we can say, oh, that's pretty cool. But by and large, we don't believe it. People tend not to believe it. We have the confines of our mentality, the world we live in and how we think. And that's what we fall back on. We might hear these, you know, cool concepts and, oh yeah, that's great, really neat. But it's not how we live, because it's so structured in the physiology, our psyche. And that is dependent on our karma, of course, but also the whole karmic thing is dependent upon the fishbowl, global consciousness. If the global consciousness is polluted, we don't think properly. We don't think in tune with the unified field, Mother Nature. And when our physiologies aren't in tune, that's why people only live, you know, 70, 100 years, whatever. When all that gets purified out, when the fishbowl gets clean, you can live as long as you want, really. And see, there's so much in historical text. So when does history cease to be viewed as history and become mythology. It's when times have passed so much that the laws of nature have changed. Over time, the laws of nature change. Physics now is even starting to recognize that. But as the laws of nature change, our lives change. So if we look at historical accounts from times where the laws of nature were different and we're functioning in kind of this confined mentality, we don't call it history anymore. We call it mythology. And even worse than that, if it is worse, we just ignore it. If something like, there's that so much now on the internet and that about these ancient civilizations and the ruins they find and how people couldn't possibly back then with their primitive technologies as we know it have built, the pyramids and all like that and all these incredible structures in India and all over. So what do we do with that? We tend to just ignore it because we can't grasp it. So the essential key to life, really, the essential key is understanding the big picture. I remember even when I was a little kid, I'd see my parents so busy doing this and their friends, and they're so busy with their lives. But it seemed like they didn't really have any grasp of the big picture. Or if you ever asked them about, oh yeah, well, there's God, and that's all good, and God is good and all that. But the context wasn't clear enough. The understanding wasn't full enough. And that's where studying things like Vedic literature come in, will change your life, because you look at it a little bit, oh yeah, great, okay, the Mahabharata, I get it, and the Upanishads, yeah, they're wonderful. But if you study all that, the more you study it, Sanskrit language, on and on, the more you realize that it makes so much sense on such a deep level. And so then you become open to paradigms, to the nature of things in a deeper way that prior to that you just reject, because it's like, well, that's cool, but yeah, it's just mythology, Now, there's another thing here about yagyas. Yagyas are ceremonies. You can have havans done, pujas done, like that. And a reasonable question is, do they work? And that's actually an interesting question to explore, because it's a technology. It's a unified field technology. They work, but there's two components that I want to mention that can lead us to believe that they don't work. And one, if the fishbowl is really polluted, if the mechanisms of operation on the deeper levels of existence are all, gunked up, okay, the gears aren't turning well and things like that, then the effectiveness of the yagya goes into more kind of melting the gunk away, and the results will still be there, but a lot of the power of it is lost, Whereas in an enlightened age, when the fishbowl is completely clean, you do a yagya for something and boom, the results are right there. The other factor to mention is that there can be a time lag. You do a yagya for an effect, and that could come about somewhat as a result of the gunked up situation of the world today. It creates a time delay. So yeah, the results come, but they don't come right away. There's an interesting analogy here, because thinking in tune is a very interesting concept. Thinking in tune. What is that? What does it even mean, to think in tune? In tune with what? Well, in tune with the unified field, in tune with the transcendent. It's a little bit like, you can do an analogy like with singing. A lot of people, they just can't sing in tune. I'm not a great singer, but they can't sing in tune. But they still, if they attempt to sing, there's a sequentiality of sounds and notes and things that come up, but they're not quite right, you know? And similarly to that, there's the analogy that when we learn about Vedic literature, or learn about this, or even learn arithmetic or anything, if the mind's not in tune, the thing, it gets distorted and it gets twisted. No matter how clearly the instruction might be, the mind is affected by the level of consciousness, also the how dirty the fishbowl is, and it's an interesting concept, you know. But you know, if you can't sing in tune, it becomes really obvious, you know, right away. But when people aren't thinking in tune, it's not so obvious because they're vested in their thoughts. Those are their thoughts. That's how they feel. The world is in a strange place right now. And you might say, well, there have been a lot of horrible times, you know, Genghis Khan, World War II, yada, yada. But I don't think historically there's been a time that I can think of where across the board, it's just no matter what subject that comes up, the group consciousness is just not in tune with Mother Nature. It's kind of twisted. And that's why is that? Because the whole thing is coming to a head, just like the Vedic literature says. This is a phase transition about to occur. So things are getting tighter and tighter, intenser and intenser, and it's manifesting in crazy ways the way people think.
Michael,
But all that's about to change. Yes, Scotty.
Some people are asking, you know, how do you know with everything so stirred up and the fishbowl being so polluted, how do you know what to be in tune with, you know, when everything's going sideways, you know?
Yeah, and obviously people don't, you know, and you can tell them and they can hear it, and even if it makes sense to them in the moment because it touches a deeper place in their normal functioning, people function from their own level of consciousness, and that's it, you know. But the best keys you have is proper meditation. And that's what we're trying, and plus what we're trying to build here at Mount Soma, something to purify the global consciousness, clean the fishbowl. It's a crazy time, that's all. You know, once somebody said to my teacher, she said, well, what she was just, what about proper diet? You know, what should we eat? And at the time he was talking about other things and stuff. And he said, well, ask your mother. She said, well, my mother doesn't know. He said, well, then ask your grandmother. And on a surface level, that can almost sound kind of offensive. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're blowing us off here. You know, what did my grandmother know? But on a deeper level, his point was that deep inside, and we can refer to that by what we think of when we think of a grandmother, kind of like Plato's form or the archetypical grandmother, the roots of life, the roots of humanity, rooted in the soil itself, you know. And so we can refer back to that. And we're not talking about the service here. We're not talking about just going back in time. We're talking about going deeper. And we all have a sense of it, like what grandmother symbolizes, you know. And so we can refer to that as some sort of guidance, some sort of a signpost along the way. But again, we have to, it's not like our actual physical grandmother. Your grandmother may have been great, maybe not, I don't know. But the grandmother as a archetypical representation of that deeper inner knowing that lies within us, though it may be hidden by the polluted fishbowl, by compromised influences in our life, the way we think, the way we've been conditioned to think. but down deep inside, you know better. And so you can do your best to refer to that. Okay, Scotty?
Yeah, it's funny because the media, everything that's being thrown at us, people, they just, whatever, and I just going crazy. But there's sometimes when, like, if I'll go out and ride the bike out in the woods or something, it's like, hey, wait a second, everything isn't just going haywire. It's all it's look at this, it's okay, but it seems like there's so much of a storm being brought by everything about.
It's a funny thing because we all long for wisdom. We all long for deeper insights. But if the mind's not in tune with the unified field, or to a degree it's not in tune, we're going to go off on tangents and we're going to think it's our wisdom. So it's not an easy question, and you can say, well, refer to your mentors and things like that, but we tend to bond with people with a similar mentality that we have. And even reading the Veda, sometimes they're referred to as the secret doctrines. Why? Because they remain a secret even to the people who have them and read them. I think people sometimes say, well, here it is, the secret doctrine, so now I'll get all the secrets. It doesn't work that way. It's how we perceive them, what we project onto them, what we get out of them. And so it's a long process. It's a process, and all we can do is our best and do our meditations and try to refer back to Mother Earth, our own inner wisdom. But our own inner wisdom isn't accessed by our conditioning to our peer groups or the influence out there. It's you have to search for it and think and have a humility. There's too much of an arrogance. It's arrogant why we looked at historical texts, and if they're not consistent with our current paradigm, we call them wrong, Yeah. Well, this is all food for thought. And it's really the point I wanted to convey. And I'd like you to think about it. And so I guess that's it for this week, unless there's something else, Scotty.
No, I think.
Okay, everybody. It's an important subject, vital, really. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again next week.